Good.
Awesome. All right, everybody. I appreciate you all coming out tonight on this rainy, dreary, somewhat cold and windy evening in the South Side. For those of you who I've not had the chance to meet, I'm State Representative Jessica Benna, and I appreciate you all coming out to hear from our lovely panel here and state your questions about Pennsylvania's liquor law and the role of different state agencies answered. Now, we've heard a lot about issues related to liquor licenses and crimes in Southside recently. My office has heard from a number of constituents and other elected officials, and we've been doing everything that we can to try to make sure that we're working together at every single level of government to address these concerns, because every single level of government has a role to play. And tonight you're going to learn a little bit more about the role of state government in talking about liquor and liquor licenses. And it is really wonderful to see some of our elected officials out here this evening as well. We're joined by Minority Leader, State Senator Jay Costa here this evening. We're also joined by my colleague, State Representative Dan Beasy. Representative Beasy is the Minority Chair of the House Liquor Control Committee, which means that he has been a great help to me in trying to advance some of the legislation that we've been talking about to the House. We're also joined by our magistrate, Dean Riccardi, here. And then we have our city councilman, Bruce Krause, as well. Really appreciate all of you being out here this evening, because as I said, every single level of government has a role to play, and we're better when we are all working together. I want to make it clear, too, that tonight is not about singling out one business or one restaurant over another. It's an opportunity to learn about the resources that we have, not only at the state level, but what municipalities, counties, and community members can do as well to address this problem. You all should have received question cards when you came in. If you fill those out, and you can put your contact written on the back as well if you would like. Part of the reason for doing the question cards in paper is twofold. One, we are live streaming tonight, and so by writing down the question, I can read it, and then it's audible to people from the microphone on the live stream. And then second, we are limited by time, and so if we don't get to everyone's question this evening, we want to make sure we're able to give you an answer to your question via another mode of communication as well. We will have Madi and Jamal, who are able to pick up the question cards from you. If you need another card, they can also give you another card too, so if you have a second follow-up question, and we'll go from there. So they'll make sure to collect those from you as questions come up. So with that, once again, welcome. And I want to make sure that we hand it off now to our wonderful slate of panelists here. They're going to briefly introduce themselves with their name, title, and what agency they're from, and then we'll go from there.
Good evening. My name is Greg Raybuck. I'm with Liquor Control Enforcement. I'm the Western Section Commander stationed out of Pittsburgh. I'm also responsible for the Punxsutawney office and the Erie office. I've been in LCE for about 2.5 years. I've been in the state police a little over 20. So that's kind of my background here.
My name is Dan Mazur. I'm a sergeant with the Pennsylvania State Police. I'm the district office commander for the Pittsburgh office, which oversees in part Allegheny County. I've been with the state police for approximately 18 years, and I've been with the LCE now for about 1.5 years in the Pittsburgh office.
I'm Dan Becky. I'm with the State Police Bureau Liquor Enforcement Pittsburgh office. Specifically, I'm a Nuisance Bars supervisor. I've been with the department for 28 years.
Hi, I'm Tim Hogan, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, and I've been on the Liquor Control Board for 8 years.
Hi, Tisha Albert. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs at the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. I've been with the board, Friday will be 31 years, and with licensing and alcohol engagement.
Hi, my name is Rod Diaz. I am the Chief Counsel for the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, and I have been with the board for 29 years.
appreciate you all introducing yourselves and for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us tonight. We have so many of you up here with all of your various areas of expertise. I really appreciate it. Just a reminder too, make sure as this goes on that you're writing down your questions, you don't forget them. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do a brief overview, very quick, about basically what each agency is and what they do, and then we'll get into the details after that. So we can start with LCD.
Thank you, Representative Benham. First of all, I want to make everyone aware, because of Representative Benham, Leader Costa, and Chairman Deasy, my fellow board members, myself, which is Mary Eisenhower, and Mike Negro, are fully aware of the challenges that you face. You know, we are in charge of issuing and renewing all licenses in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so we work closely with all of your representatives as these come up and with your local police department. So I know there are a lot of concerns, and you probably heard from the introduction how much seniority we have in the room here from the PLCB, who is very, very familiar with the tools we have in the toolbox when it comes to the renewal or non-renewal or transfer of a license. So I think because we have time restraints, at this time I'm going to yield to our Chief Counsel, Rod Diaz, and Rod, can you explain some of the things we have done and some of the things we can do?
Sure, and I'm going to keep it brief because I know we're going to get into more detail later. But generally speaking, as Tim mentioned, we process the application. So if you're interested in getting a liquor license, you have to apply to us, and we evaluate whether or not you qualify. We evaluate whether or not neighbors have protested, and ultimately decide whether or not to grant that license. By the same token, when your license comes up for renewal, when we have an application before us, we review and make sure that the entity qualifies. Other than that, generally speaking, the day-to-day enforcement of the liquor code and the regulations is something that falls under LCE, and I'm sure they're going to talk about that. Tish, anything you want to add?
You know, I just wanted to add, again, we'll get into some details later. Licenses in Allegheny County, they renew every 2 years. The odd years, so this year, 2021 in May, the licenses renewed. So we have a very small window. The Liquor Control Board has a very small window at that time. And again, as Rod said, the day-to-day enforcement is with your Liquor Control Board.
We have a very close relationship with. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so the LCE role is mainly, like they said, the enforcement branch of the rules and regulations that are set forth for a licensee to maintain their license. We do have several different ways that we go about doing that through inspections. We have an underage buyer program to make sure that folks are not selling to underage kids. We have a nuisance bar program whenever a bar comes on our radar that is not following those rules and regulations. We have some steps. And Dan Becky can speak to that a lot more in depth. So in general, we're enforcing those things that are set forth to have a license.
And specifically from the Pittsburgh office standpoint, we oversee Allegheny County, Beaver County, Fayette County, Warren County, Greene County, Washington County. We work hand in hand with local municipalities well before anything ever occurred or the Southside ever became an issue. We already have established means of communication and protocols and task force and things like that to make sure that we're as proactive as we can possibly be. Keeping in mind, liquor control enforcement is a narrow window as to one cog in the wheel, and there's multiple cogs in the wheel, obviously. But in the Pittsburgh office, especially with Allegheny County, we have already pre-established rapport with the City of Pittsburgh Police, the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office, municipal police agencies, and things like that. So to help enforce those day-to-day regulations, to do things like the routines and stuff that have brought to our attention issues that they're having with a particular establishment. One of those proactive things we do is work with the Nuisance Bar Task Force, with Allegheny County, with the City of Pittsburgh Police Department. Supervisor Becky is the one as an EO3 with LCE who heads that up for our office, and maybe he can speak to just for a moment some of the some of the aspects of the Nuisance Bar Task Force, some of the things that we do as part of that.
So one of the things we do is on a monthly basis, we're meeting with representatives from Pittsburgh Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. And we discuss any problem bars. If there is an establishment that say that there's been a violent offense at, shooting, stabbing, major fight, we're meeting with those bar owners within 24 hours. And a lot of times if it is a shooting, just because of like out of precaution to avoid any kind of retaliatory issues, we'll ask that establishment to shut down until we can meet with them in person, sit down face to face and go over how they're operating. We'll suggest ways that they can change their operation to avoid these things from occurring in the future, and we'll go forward with that. Whether we have to step up enforcement with that bar, doing additional routine inspections, or sending undercover officers into that bar, just to try to gain compliance with that. On the south side, we haven't really had many recently that have raised to the level where we've needed to have a community meeting to discuss a specific bar to bring action against that. But Pittsburgh is very cooperative with us in providing any police reports. Same thing with the District Attorney's Office.
I really appreciate you all giving us those overviews of what those agencies do. I think that's really helpful, particularly the distinction between the two of you. Sometimes people get that confused. So I really appreciate that. I'm wondering if what you can talk about now, particularly LCE, is some of the things that you've done recently in Southside. I know both the senator and I have been on your cases a little bit. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, and then more broadly, what kind of actions are in your toolbox?
So, in keeping our finger to the pulse of what's going on, when the South Side, when there starts to become issues this summer in the South Side, we immediately redirected resources towards the South Side area of Pittsburgh. Keeping in mind that spreads out very quickly, and in the fall it especially spread out once the students came back in Oakland, because now it's just a short bridge trip over to the south side of Pittsburgh. So immediately before before I ever spoke with anybody from the representative's office or anything, we had already diverted and made it a point for LCE to redirect some resources, particularly on the problem weekends. And initially it was Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, to go to the south side and be as proactive as possible, seek out violations and things like that. Additionally, we contacted the City of Pittsburgh Police Department. They were very, they were great to work with. We, myself and E03 Becky, we had at least 2 sit-down meetings with their higher chain of command, and we discussed different options and things like that. What we could do, what they could do. Keeping in mind, we already have this report with the Nuisance Bar Task Force in their department. They were also in on these meetings, and we discussed a little bit of a plan going forward and a couple options that maybe they had through the Pennsylvania State Police and Liquor Control Enforcement. Additionally, in going down through the into the south side, the Pennsylvania State Police became aware that there was an issue outside of LCE. The state police directed resources to the south side of Pittsburgh area. And we worked with the state police and the city police and things like that. And we would come in and we would do directed enforcement efforts towards the south side of Pittsburgh. While this is all going on, we attended stakeholder meetings with the owners of the restaurants and establishments in the south side. The Nuisance Bar Task Force folks went out to help educate as much as we could with speaking with specific locations. There were, if everybody recalls correctly, at the beginning, there were 1 or 2 establishments that were called out initially to where these incidents occurred. Our nuisance bar folks went and met with them, discussed the issues. Those locations were actually, without saying the name, the one actually was having underage concerts on a Thursday night. They agreed to cease the underage concerts on a Thursday night. That helped to curb some of those issues. Once that occurred, then we continued, and we still continue to come down to the south side of Pittsburgh and the Oakland area and everywhere, but pointed and directed towards here to conduct both undercover and uniform type assignments. Without going into the sources and methods we use, we deploy however we believe is prudent at the time. So most recently, Pitt just won the ACC championship. Everybody can clap. Well, little does anybody know, LCE was in and around everything that was going on there. So that's just an example, and I only tell you that to use that as an example. Maybe they didn't see uniforms that said LCE or the Pennsylvania State Police, but we were well aware of everything that was going on, looking for violations and being proactive. And so that is from the inception of there beginning to be known issues. We were meeting with the stakeholders, we were meeting with the businesses, we were meeting with the police departments, and we were just continuing to share tools and resources and ideas and whatever we can bring to the table. And ultimately, the Pennsylvania State Police did respond in a robust way by providing Pennsylvania State Police troopers and LCE, and they provided support so that we could come down and we could have a pointed attack towards the south side to hopefully help curb some issues that were going on. As a result of that, and I'm not going to speak to what the troop did, but they made multiple arrests, things like that. LCE, we would go into licensed establishments. The first time we went in, we ended up writing 24 non-traffic citations, mainly for false IDs and underage drinking. 2 weeks later, not that we weren't there in between, but 2 weeks later, we went back to another establishment. We ended up writing 40 non-traffic citations inside that establishment for false IDs, underage drinking, public intoxication, and things like that. And we also deployed with the city of Pittsburgh on their nightly or their weekend roll calls to avail ourselves and provide our contact information if they were to have something. We would be there. But we work hand in hand with PSP and the city of Pittsburgh to offer up as much resources as we can, and we continue to do that.
And if we can have LCD talk a little bit about you have a very narrow window in which you can do things, but if you can talk a little bit about what that looks like and how community can be involved in any of that, that would be helpful.
Sure. As Tisha mentioned, the renewal cycle is every 2 years. So upon the renewal, we contact the Pittsburgh Police Department. We work closely with the LCE on enforcement, and we try to identify bars that may not deserve to be renewed. Of course, after that decision is made, and if the decision is not to renew it, it is appealable to the Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County. So maybe Rod and Tisha can give some examples of things we've done in Allegheny County, particularly on the south side.
Tish, why don't you start off by giving them like the timeline process?
Sure. So as I said, licenses in Allegheny County, they renew every 2 years in May. So this year in 2021, actually starting in January, what my staff does is we reach out to the district attorney's office, the legislators, liquor control enforcement, the local police department, and determine are there candidates that they would like us to review a licensee's operational history. And that can be done by providing police reports and the citation history, which as they were talking, as liquor enforcement was talking, they find violations at establishments. If they're found guilty through a different entity, the administrative law judge, we, the Liquor Control Board, can use that at the time of renewal. So we evaluate all the evidence that we have for a particular licensee, work with our chief counsel's office. If it's deemed there's sufficient evidence that a licensee can be connected to the manner of which activities happening in and outside, immediately outside the establishment, we schedule an administrative hearing after we give licenses notice. They can operate on temporary operating authority until we go to an administrative hearing, and then ultimately the decisions made by our 3-member board. I would like to point out also, we talked about the Nuisance Bar Task Force. Although our staff, the Liquor Control Board can only look at a license every 2 years. We stay in constant contact with liquor enforcement. I do have someone from my staff on the task force for my regional office in Pittsburgh. And again, anytime there's a news article, I do follow-ups throughout the 2 years. If the legislator, if there's concerns, they reach out and we can start that process a little early.
Can I speak to something real? It's not an all or nothing type thing. There's intermediate steps, and we work with the board to do like what they call conditional licensing agreements and things like that. So if we see there's a problem, we'll go meet with that establishment. And a lot of times, a conditional licensing agreement fixes the problem we might have. So maybe we we suggest some sort of conditions, like maybe they change the type of music, or they don't stay open. One of the things that we might point out, well, all of your violent incidents are occurring after 1 o'clock in the morning, so maybe you don't stay open until then. Maybe you stay open only until midnight or something like that. But there is an intermediate step in between having a license and not having a license, and that is constantly being monitored. And the LCE is the go-between with the board to achieve that.
And I would also point out, if there's not enough evidence for us to object to a license, we do have an option to issue an administrative warning that's putting the licensee on notice saying, hey, we're watching you, we're going to follow back up in the subsequent renewal period. And a lot of times that is enough to have a licensee change their way of operating.
The last thing I would add, sometimes it is an all or nothing thing. We will refuse the renewal of a license. The licensee has the right to appeal to the local court of common pleas, and that judge has what's known as de novo review. And what that simply means is he doesn't have to pay, or she doesn't have to pay any attention to how we weigh the evidence and how we reached our conclusion. They are free to reinterpret the evidence. They are free to take a look at the same case we did and said, no, I'm going to renew their license. Now, they cannot do conditional licensing agreements. So if it gets to the common pleas judge, it is, again, you either renew or you don't renew. So a lot of cases do end up as CLAs, otherwise known as conditional licensing agreements, so that we get some relief, because there's always the chance that a common pleas judge is going to look at it differently. And you know, in those hearings in front of common pleas judges, the licensee is going to point out, you know, things that aren't technically relevant to what's going on, but that may affect the judge's decision, such as, look at all these employees I have. If you take my license away, they're gonna need jobs. I spent, you know, 6 figures to get this license. I'm a viable business, and you know, sometimes that sways judges. So.
But we've been successful in Allegheny County on our last 2 cases. I believe we've been upheld.
I think you're thinking about Philadelphia now.
Okay. we don't have time for
We've been successful in Philadelphia.
So I would just for the board, this year we did look at 5 licenses on Carson Street in the south side in this area. So we're still going through that administrative process right now. So I can't really speak to the litigation, but again, that's all the effort in working together collaboratively with the police and liquor enforcement.
Yeah, the one thing I'll note, I know in some of the conversations that we've had with the DA's office here in Allegheny County, there are some Court of Common Pleas judges in the county who believe that licenses are property that is protected not merely by law, but by the Constitution, which becomes then a very difficult thing. Counsel does not believe that that is true. I do not believe that that is true. But yes, but it does not stop the judges from arguing that, which of course makes it difficult, because as a legislator I deal with laws and not the Constitution to address those things. But I appreciate all of you for going into what falls within your wheelhouses. As a reminder, if you're here in person, write your questions down on the card. If you are watching the live stream, you can type your questions into the comment section. We'll be able to see them and answer them here as well. So just a heads up on that one. Let's see, where are we at here? We're going to talk about we talked generally about how every part of government has a role, from the municipality to the county to the state and so on. I'm wondering if you all can talk about some of the things that fall not on your plate. So what should people call the county health department for? What should people talk to the city about? And what should people talk to local law enforcement about?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
So, and I'll speak to Allegheny County because that's where we're at. Allegheny County, because we have the Nuisance Bar Task Force established, it's almost like a one-stop shop. Nuisance Bar Task Force doesn't just involve LCE or the City of Pittsburgh Police or the DA's office. It doesn't just involve liquor control. Or law enforcement. It involves the Department of Health, fire, things like that. And when they have their meetings, all these things are brought. And when they go around and they do their visits, it's usually standard protocol that we have the Department of Health with us. We have fire. We have these other administrative type agencies that can help go in and look at things in their purview or their calling. One of the biggest questions we get is we have places that are run as, and we're speaking about delegation of who does what. One of the biggest things we get is when we do speakeasy investigations, and this happens a lot in Allegheny County, places will run as a bottle club. And layman's definition is the bottle club is the BYOB, right? That's where you bring your own liquor. That is not a licensed establishment. That does not fall under the purview of LCD or LCB. That falls under the jurisdiction of the municipal police department that covers that area. We field questions like this all the time, where the bar will charge a cover charge, and it'll just be a BYOB, bring your own bar. We work hand in hand with the local police departments. We just did it yesterday, or the day before yesterday, not in Allegheny County, but to provide a local police department. Here's a copy of here's a copy of the law. This is the highlights of the law. The alcohol has to be out by a certain time and things like that, so that they just can't run under the guise of a bottle club. They can't just run a speakeasy. So, but that is one of the things I would say we see where we almost have to refer back to the municipality and the local police department to enforce that. And I think that adds to a point of confusion, because a lot of folks assume because there's alcohol there that it falls under the LCD or the LCB, and it does not. It actually falls under your local police department. If any of your local municipalities are having issues with that, please reach out to us, have their chief or whoever reach out to us, and we will get them that information. We do that almost probably weekly to local places. And we understand that's a point of frustration with citizens, because they're upset with this certain location, but they're not a licensed establishment, and it doesn't fall under the purview of LCD or the LCD. So would you like to discuss some of the other tools that, we talked about the meetings and things like that. They'll do like tenant agreements or tenant groups or something like that, or collecting statements.
We have done that before in the past. If there is a problem establishment, to go forward with, say, 611 action. 611 action is an action where if you have a problematic bar, it's declared a nuisance, and it gets padlocked, and that order is issued by a judge. One of the biggest teeth that we have in something like that would be the people that live in that community being able to come forward and testify or provide statements. Some of the establishments that we've dealt with before in the past, individuals have made threats to individuals that live in the neighborhoods. So we worked with the DA's office in getting a tenant association set up so that one individual can come forth and testify, but we can take statements from everybody. Those are more impactful in getting a place shut down than any of the enforcement action that we do. Because the judge actually hears from the people that live in that community and are being impacted. These are the people that are picking up the hypodermic needles, seeing the drug transactions, having their vehicles shot up. And Allegheny County hasn't had a lot of it. I've seen a lot of success in other counties. But Allegheny County, we don't have the community coming forward to testify as much as we have in other counties as well.
One last thing before we pass the ball off. LCE is considering things in two prongs, generally. We're considering, are we looking at a criminal avenue or are we looking at an administrative avenue? And sometimes it's both. Like, for instance, we might have something that ends up going two ways. It could be a criminal violation as far as the law goes, and it could be an administrative violation as far as because they're a licensed establishment, they have certain responsibilities. But that is something we consider also. And when I say some of these, like a speakeasy, for instance, that's a place selling alcohol that's unlicensed, that is a criminal violation. That's not an administrative violation. But if we're talking about something like a loudspeaker violation where the neighborhood bar is just playing the music too loud, that's an administrative violation. If we meet the parameters for that, that would go administratively to the administrative law judge. Whereas the criminal violations, like the speakeasy, and that's probably the biggest criminal violation we see outside of like underage drinking, that goes through the normal court process of whatever county that's in.
Rod, anything you want to add about 611 action?
There's just different entities. Sorry, it's called a 611 action because that's the section of the liquor code that it falls under, section 611. It does list the entities that can bring such an action, and generally speaking, they are the Attorney General, the LCE, as they mentioned, the municipality itself, and the local district attorney, and in fact, the neighbors within 500 feet themselves can bring such an action. But it is particularly hard for them to do so because the governmental agencies have certain advantages under the statute. They are, as you mentioned, it does have the advantage of providing immediate relief through an injunction. It has the disadvantage that a lot of judges are going to demand a very high level of proof before they shut their business down. We, the liquor board, are not one of the entities listed as being able to bring such an action, so we're really less familiar with it. One additional tool we do have, it doesn't fit exactly here, but which we do have nonetheless, is our licensing compliance program, and I'll let you explain that.
Sure. So a few years ago, there was legislation passed that if licensees, in order to we'll just take the restaurants, which is the majority of what's in the immediate area, they have to have seating and food for 30 persons. They have to have a valid health permit, and they have to have 400 square feet of serving area. So if a licensee is not maintaining that, there is an option. If we receive a complaint, we do an investigation, and we do it jointly with liquor enforcement. If we do go to an establishment and they're not maintaining, they don't have the food, they don't have the square footage, a health permit, or seating, we can immediately suspend that license for a certain period of time until they come back into compliance and then ask. So that's the only action that the liquor board can do something immediately outside of the 2-year period.
And you've used it, I mean, mostly in Philadelphia.
It's mostly Philadelphia, but we have, we've worked with the Allegheny Health Department in the beginning of COVID, where there were a bunch of violations and health permits being revoked or suspended. So we have, again, a rapport with the local officials.
All right, I just want to check and see if we can maybe talk just a little bit more about the 611 action in terms of how that process goes. I think that would be helpful. I know that doesn't so much fall under your purview, but you all have seen it happen. So I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit more about the process.
Well, before you explain, what we've learned and what I see is, we have to do a good investigation leading up to it. We have to have our ducks in a row before we go forward with it. That's our best chance of winning. So some of the things we do is we go around and we do area canvases. We do meetings with the restaurant owners and things like that. We usually, if it's to the point where there's a conditional licensing, if it's to the point where we're going to seek a 611, all these other tools have been exhausted. We've already been through the conditional licensing agreement. We've already been through, meeting with the establishment owner and things like that to finally get us to the point where there's the legal will to pursue the 611 action. So the only thing I want to say is that we have to do, it takes a little bit of time. It's not something that there's a problem establishment today and tomorrow we're seeking a 611. We have to have, the stilts, the foundation of the house has to be established before we do the roof. So we've gone and exhausted these other things, and it really is like a last ditch effort. We don't want to, and sometimes the consideration of the establishment owner is if they believe the 611 action, if they know they've done things that are probably going to have the 611 action upheld or stated, they will sometimes agree to, make a bunch of drastic changes or sell the license or sell the establishment or something like that. So it is the last thing we want to pursue if possible, but it doesn't happen overnight, and we have to, like I said, we have to have a thorough and robust investigation to get us there. So,
I would just add that, as far as the Liquor Control Board, again, we're not one of the agencies that can initiate that, but I have had the district attorney's office and or whomever who's going to initiate that. We do provide certifications, just who the bar owners are, the establishment, how long they've held the license, just to give LCE, the district attorney's office, that certification to go into court. And then if there is a successful 611 licensed establishment and judged a nuisance, that is an automatic objection to their license at the following renewal period.
even though the LCE is one of the entities that can bring the 611, we're not bringing it. The district attorney's office is bringing it. So just so we're clear, like, we work all across the state, the Commonwealth. Like if it's in Allegheny County, we have to have the support of the Allegheny County District Attorney or the Beaver County or the Washington County District Attorney's Office to bring that 611. Obviously, they want, they want to be able to go into court and win. And like I said, other counties use it more often than certain other counties.
It's very helpful, and we did invite the district attorney's office to this. Unfortunately, with as busy as their schedule, they were not able to send to anybody. We did have a conversation with them about 611 actions, and certainly one of the reasons why we haven't seen as many in Allegheny County is judges being somewhat more unwilling, for reasons previously discussed, to take those kinds of complaints seriously. But it sounds like from what I'm hearing here, concerns and complaints from community members and that kind of testimony can be really valuable. Certainly many of you bring issues to my office, which is very helpful. I know you bring them to the councilmen as well. And so having a sense of which neighbors live in proximity to and are upset with particular establishments is helpful, even if it is a long-term kind of issue that we would be connecting with. So we appreciate you all doing that. So I think at this point, I will ask if you all have anything further to add on your sort of summary of everything, and then we'll move into Q&A at that point.
No, I think we're okay. We're ready for questions.
All good. All right. Well, we have a lot of them, and they keep coming in. So please continue to send them over. If you are online, of course, comment them, and we will get that as well. So the first question here, you've already talked a bit about what the enforcement efforts are that you're doing. This person says, per the fiscal press release for 2020 to 2021, $29.2 million went to the state police for liquor control enforcement efforts. They're wondering how that was spent and on what kinds of enforcement happens.
Well, we can't answer that question. We are told what to transfer every year, but we have a great working relationship, but we don't get a line item appropriation of how it's spent. It goes in, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it goes into the state police general fund for operations.
Yeah, and I want to clarify too. The Pittsburgh District Enforcement Office did not get $29 million.
Yes.
Right?
No.
There are 9 enforcement offices across the Commonwealth. There are approximately 20,000 liquor licenses across the Commonwealth. The Pittsburgh District Enforcement Office does have the lion's share of those licenses. We have approximately 20% of them, but that's spread out through all 6 of those counties, or all 5 of those counties that we covered. So it goes into the general fund. You're exactly right, and then it's dispersed out through the channels it needs. I will tell you this: anytime I've gone and said I need money for something, I've gotten it. So I believe that our commanders are doing what they're supposed to do to give us the tools and the resources that we need going forward.
That's helpful, I think, clarity. So I appreciate that. This question is for LCB. How do you make a decision about how many alcohol licenses go into a particular neighborhood? And how do you determine, I think this is meant, like, how do you make a difference between a bar and a restaurant?
Well, there's a quota system across the Commonwealth, that every county in the Commonwealth is above the quota, I believe, on the number of licenses, correct?
Essentially.
Yeah.
So the number of restaurant liquor licenses is set forth by statute. And there is no separate bar license. So that local bar has a restaurant liquor license, or possibly what's known as a retail dispenser license if they're only selling beer. The current ratio is no more additional licenses can be issued if the number of existing licenses is greater than 1 license per 3,000 inhabitants within the county. Yes, so right after Prohibition, there was no quota. And over the years, they created one in 1939, which was 1 in 1,000, but they grandfathered all the existing licenses. And further, Pennsylvania's population over the last 60 years really hasn't grown much, but it's moved. So there are a lot of places that had a lot of people, and the quotas were based on that higher number. As to the number of licenses in neighborhoods, the board can consider whether or not, or the board has discretion to refuse a license if there is another bar within 200 feet of the licensed establishment. Again, that being said, common pleas judges have that same discretion, and so often the board's gonna want to have a good reason to use their discretion. So, what is it particularly about this neighborhood that we have concerns about alcohol? Maybe, and I'm going to give some general examples that Tim, I know the board has refused. Hey, this new bar is right next to a high school, and we're not comfortable at all that these guys have the proper safeguards in place, after the hearing, to keep those high school kids out. And the high school has explained to us why they're very concerned, or worse yet, maybe there's preschool. So we can consider it in a very limited fashion if they're very close to each other. But the total number of licenses, I know there's a saturation. You're not going to get any new ones in your county, but the old ones are going to remain.
And some of the complaints we get are current licensees do not want the competition. And we're just not going to, we will not refuse those renewable licenses because of a neighboring licensee doesn't want the competition. We won't do that.
And I would just add that if one license is being transferred to another municipality, that receiving municipality has to give an approval or a decision before we would even receive it, before it comes to the file.
And that's one level of municipal control. There's not a whole lot of municipal control in the liquor pool, but that's one. We'll probably circle back to that. I know there's some other questions later on that get into a little bit more of talking about saturation. But for now, the next question is, you have monthly meetings with the police and the DA to get reports. How do you ensure you're getting all of the info regarding Southside? Why not include resident input as well?
That does occur. I know we discussed getting the reports. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that my nuisance bar guys call me on the weekend just to say, hey, this just happened at this municipality. We've already set the meeting up for them on Monday. We do. We go and we speak to the residents and we do those types of our due diligence to get that information. So if that wasn't explained earlier, we use every tool or resource to find locations. We also, in that same vein, every single complaint we get, we investigate. Every single one. So when we get a complaint, we investigate. And you know, there's all kinds of resources for folks to investigate. And some of those are unfounded. Some of them are, we can't, establish any sort of complaint. But we look into every single one of those complaints that comes through. But speaking with community members when it's appropriate is absolutely done.
Thanks, that's helpful. I think a lot of the time we don't always know everything that happens, so that's useful. Okay, is a bar responsible for loud noises and bad behavior that occurs on the sidewalk adjacent to the establishment? And are they responsible to remove piles of trash in a timely manner?
Well, I can answer to the noise outside. If there's a causal connection, like say there's arguing patrons inside, and the bar just pushes them outside, and they're outside the bar and they're screaming and yelling, that responsibility's going to fall back on the establishment, and they need to be taking some action to make sure that if they need to contact the local police to have them disperse those individuals, that they are. Or if they have their own security to ensure these individuals are moving along. But as far as a lot of times we get complaints about motorcycles, people have a Harley night or something and motorcycles are revving, and that's not really in our area under the bar. It's nothing that we can do with it. Essentially, when it comes to noise, we're mostly looking at the music, entertainment that's being provided inside the establishment, being able to hear it off of their property. And we can't do anything whenever it comes to trash outside that in their room.
Yeah, so the trash would be something you would want a 311 for CLI to take a look at. And then when it comes to loud noises not directly in or connected to the establishment, that would be a noise violation for the city of Pittsburgh for the sidewalk, but not LCD. Okay, so this question is about so which agency addresses, I think rats, maybe rats or rotten, maybe food preparation taking place a few feet from dumpsters and frequent public urination on and around them. Is this an obvious health hazard? And who addresses the rodents often seen at this same site? So anything with rats and food would be the health department, not anybody up here. So that would be a complaint made to the Allegheny County Health Department, which you can do on their website.
The urination would be something for your municipal police department to deal with.
Now, if as a result of this, your Department of Agriculture takes the health permit away, you let us know and we will shut them down. Sure. Tisha mentioned earlier about the licensing compliance program, where if a licensee no longer meets the requirements under the liquor code, we go in and we take their authority away. One of the requirements of the liquor code is that you have the appropriate health permit. So if, as a result of this activity, you've reported it to the county health department, they take away the permit to prepare food there, they no longer meet the qualifications of liquor code, we can go in and we can take their liquor authority away until they get the health permit back.
In application though, what generally happens is those establishments go in and clean it up. The health department usually reinstates their license, and it's usually a pretty quick turnaround. So just to let you know, in the practical application of that, it's not usually a prolonged thing. Normally the establishment goes into compliance with the health department.
So it's not a magic bullet, as it were.
No, it's not.
So these two questions are somewhat related. The first one is, as residents, what can we do when we believe a business is a nuisance bar? And the second question is, what's considered sufficient evidence of a nuisance in terms of licensing?
So nuisance bar actually has a definition.
Well, I do.
We actually brought the definition, so anticipating this question. So
The definition is very broad. So whenever we're looking at a nuisance, essentially what we're looking at is it a drain on the community? Is it a drain on local law enforcement's resources, LCE's resources? So those items together is what combines to make a nuisance bar. It's not just one item. You know, it's health department issues. It's police complaints constantly going back to the same establishment. Complaints that we're receiving and our officers are investigating and finding things. Then we're going to step it up. We're going to talk to the owners of the establishment, possibly get a conditional licensing agreement. And one of the things that we do with that conditional licensing agreement, we're kind of like setting the stage, like we're offering you to make these changes, and we're hoping that in good faith you make these changes. If you don't, we're going to notify the board, and you're going to be subject to a non-renewal. If you continue on this route, then we're going to have the DA's office push to have a 611 action taken. So
We also go out to the community and we talk to all the neighbors within a certain distance from that bar. And certainly as far as getting a nuisance bar investigation started, a lot of times it's simply, hey, we're having a problem with this place. Can you go look at it? And one of our officers goes out and they start the investigation and it grows from there. And that's a lot of times what we see. Or the police departments are calling us saying, hey, this thing's out of control. Can you help?
We can probably add, and sometimes the two agencies use the same terms, but they're used differently. So we have a nuisance bar program. So at renewal time, every 2 years, we will look at the citation history of the licensee, with particular focus on those citations that affect the community, such as after hours service, or sales to minors, or sales to visibly intoxicated patrons. We will look at, as the criminal activity is occurring on or around the licensed premises. Again, if there are citations that address that, we'll look at those. If there's particular incidents that are brought to our attention, we look to see whether or not there's a pattern of such activity. And as the courts have told us, you can't hold a licensee responsible just because there was, for example, a drug deal on the premises. The police couldn't stop the drug activity. You can't expect the licensee to. So you do look at what steps they've taken to prevent such activity in the future. So we look for patterns. We look to see whether they've taken steps to prevent. We look at the citation history. And we have a very specific criteria we have on our website. If it hits that criteria, then we have an administrative hearing. And then the board has to decide after the administrative hearing, what do you want to do with this bar? And then again, ultimately, Court of Common Pleas may tell us what they want to tell us.
Yeah, so as a reminder, our judges are elected positions. So next time judicial candidates are knocking doors in Southside, you may want to ask them their position on whether or not they believe that a license is property protected by the Constitution. So that went away for next county court elections. And to echo, what they were talking about, there are multiple ways you as a community member can kick off an investigation, as it were. You can report to the Nuisance Bar Task Force. You can talk to the police. You can talk to councilman, myself, the senator, and we can get that moving. So there's multiple avenues that you can take to get the process really started, and they all kind of end up at the same place, but multiple paths to get there. And this, I think, builds off of what the folks from LTV were just talking about, which is what are the specific things that disqualify a license for renewal, and to talk about sort of extreme level, like shootings and stabbings, do things have to reach such an extreme to revoke license?
No, I mean, we have, Dan has said, we look at, if there's fights outside or fights that started inside and spilled to the outside. Are there the overservice of patrons, or they're pushing and shoving inside, constant urination outside, just immediately outside. So we do take all those, find the nexus between a licensed establishment and an activity. Was the bar open? So we do thoroughly review all these types of incidents.
But they have to be reported.
Reported,
Yes.
but they have to be reported.
Yes, and that's the key. We talk about this robust investigation. If you don't live in the city of Pittsburgh, and like I said, the city of Pittsburgh is great with doing this, with getting us the reports and things like that. But this is one of the first things when we go to other municipalities, the first thing we say is, they say, I have a problem at this location, and we're like, okay, we need to see your report you have for that location. And the truth is, very often, they don't have it. So that's where, if you have a problem location, report it to your local police. That's how we get that started. Because without the documentation, it never occurred. And that's why we need to get the documentation.
And we have at our administrative hearings had community members testify because they kept a log and they could tell us every song at a wedding that was held at an establishment because the music was so loud. So I would also suggest keeping their logs too.
And I know there are several of you who do that, who have shared your security camera footage of things happening. So, please know that we do, when we receive those things, pass that on to LCE so that they are aware of all of those things as well.
There's a complaint telephone line and a website, and I'll avail that to you so you can provide it to them.
I believe it's in these pamphlets that you all have. So we do have, and I'm sure many of you picked it up on your way in, a very comprehensive pamphlet with a lot of different links and phone numbers and places where you can report things. I believe it is on that, but I will double check. So, but yes, please, we do hear complaints, we do pass them along, but please make sure that you are reporting them when they happen. That's very helpful. This one, a lot of our issues stem from businesses with amusement permits. Can amusement permits be taken away?
Yes, we can object to the renewal of an amusement permit. And there have been times before we have objected to the license, and the end result was that they gave up their amusement permit or lost their amusement permit because we thought if the amusement permit were to go away, the problems may get resolved. And I also think judges may be more likely to sustain the denial of an amusement permit versus the denial of a license. And the type of activity we look at when it comes to amusement permits tends to be noise violations. Any amplified music being heard off of the property line is a violation of the liquor code subject to citation in most municipalities. Municipalities can opt out of that regulation, and some have. I don't think Pittsburgh does. So that's the focus when it comes to the use of the amusement permit. Maybe after hours, if they have bands after hours, or noisy and disorderly operation when it's the band that's causing the problem.
Good. Right. So this one, I think, builds off of some of what we were talking about earlier. The question is, what kind of governance is given to the number of licenses given to the South Side? And you all have already answered that you don't do neighborhood by neighborhood. It is county by county. I think what I can speak to here, and I'll ask the chairman and the senator to chime in here as well, is that, this is something that we've had conversations about providing a little bit more local control to municipalities over. I don't think that the state can give a one-size-fits-all when it comes to neighborhood or block-by-block levels of saturation, because what works in Philly doesn't necessarily work in Pittsburgh, doesn't necessarily work in Reading. And so this is something where we've talked about more local control. And it's why I introduced a bill earlier this spring, actually before a lot of the issues happened in Southside. The councilman and I have had some conversations about the fact that there could be issues over the summer given the return to Carson Street that we were anticipating. And so I introduced this piece of legislation that I've been advocating for The minority chairman of the Liquor Committee has been in fantastic support. Nearly every Democrat who sits on the Liquor Committee has signed on to the bill. And what this bill would do is give municipalities another tool in their toolbox to address saturation levels at a much more hyper-local level. Of course, there is a sad comment in Harrisburg, which is that it takes an average of 6 years to pass a piece of legislation. I wish it was a joke. Some people say it as though it were a joke. It is not. It is a sad fact that things move very slowly. And certainly we're hitting some roadblocks in House Liquor Committee. And so, Chairman, I'll have you maybe come up here at the microphone, and you can talk a little bit about some of the difficulty we're facing in the Liquor Committee.
Thank you, and thanks for hosting, Jess, and appreciate all the people coming out. Again, we face some challenges throughout our committee. It seems like our priorities are in different places sometimes. With the past year, with the COVID situation, a lot of our focus has been on restaurant grants and helping the small businesses that have suffered and the workers that have suffered. And it seems like on the other side, we're dealing with canned cocktails and other priorities, unfortunately. But Jess's bill is common sense. These are quality of life issues. People in the neighborhood, you have kids, and the sad thing is, you think most restaurant and bar owners are responsible, and they are, and they want, let's face it, they get their crowd on Friday, Saturday night, but they also need the neighborhood people on a night like tonight to go watch Monday Night Football and have a beer. And you would think that they would be cooperative with the community, and most of them are. But in this particular situation, Jess grabbed the ball early. Since she got sworn in January, we had meetings, I think it was March, talking about this issue. Obviously, we didn't foresee all the violence and some of the issues coming up, but she saw some of the issues with the neighborhood and wanted to know what she could do to work on those things. Lynn Bankett Davis is here. She is our executive director. She has had extensive meetings with Jess as well. And anything we can do to shepherd that through our committee, and we're having trouble, and we don't get to pass a lot of bills on our side, but we're going to continue the conversation, and we're going to work together and do whatever we can to work on the bill.
Senator, if you'd like to talk a little bit about anything that you're working on in the state Senate, please feel free.
Well, thank you very much, Representative, for getting folks together here. I know that we've had a number of conversations over the years, but you guys coming here to Pittsburgh, and Tim, thank you for coming out, Chairman, and folks from Harrisburg. But some of the legislation the Representative talked about, and we've tried in the past to be able to do the same thing. I remember working with the councilman and some other folks a number of years ago, and sometimes we do hit a roadblock. And Representative Bennett said it takes 6 years to get legislation passed. That's if you're a Democrat, that Dan tried to allude to. If you're a Republican, you can get it done much quicker, quite frankly. Not to be partisan, but I think it's a reality here. And have somebody else, another party maybe been involved, and we tried to do that, and we worked through that. We do shepherd through a number of matters that are a bipartisan coalition of matters that we work together on. Updates the liquor code, for example, things that were done. You mentioned Philadelphia, that came out of conversations regarding something called stop and go legislation that the LCB and LC are very much aware of in the Philadelphia area. But I got to tell you, the things that are important to the community regarding the local patrol and being able to do the things representatives legislation, what it does is it's difficult to get those things passed. And I think we're going to continue working with her and Chairman DC to try to do what we can on our side. Senator Jim Brewster from the Mon Valley is our chairperson of the committee and does a good job in working. And Steve Bruder from my office is the executive director for that committee, works closely with Dan's folks and everyone else in that regard, and certainly with both these guys and ladies up here. So I think it's the effort we've got to continue to put forward. And your input and understanding of the process, I think, is really important, and understand exactly what paths we can go down, what steps we can take to be able to build that case, and the reporting of those things. It's more than just a phone call to somebody. It's got to be documented and reported to build that case, particularly against a particular location. And it goes beyond those other type of things that are activities that are taking place. I mean, I know that there are some instances where you've got tax issues and revenue issues that need to be addressed as well that impact what takes place at LCB and LCE. So all those things we need to learn more about in those processes. And tonight's gathering has been wonderful. So thank you, Representative Bennett, for putting it together. So thanks.
Thanks, Senator Costa. I appreciate your advocacy, because we know we gotta have both chambers to try to get something moving. I try to be as partisan as least often as I possibly can. I sometimes said, you know, a lot of the work that I do is around healthcare and around issues particularly for those with disabilities, and those are areas where we do a lot of bipartisan cooperation. So I sometimes find myself frustrated at times where bipartisan cooperation is tough for me, but we'll get there. The next question that we have is, what is the threshold of violation to not renew an establishment license? And I think we've talked a little bit about this already, but I think folks are maybe looking for sort of an exact formula where is there a line, a hard line in the sand?
Ron could elaborate, but a lot of our conditional licensing agreements say that if you get a citation during this next 2-year cycle, we will not renew your license. But as far as the threshold goes, we don't have a definite number.
Yeah, the statute allows us to look at citation histories, criminal convictions, and the activity occurring at the premises. We actually have a criteria that is on our website we can share with you. You can share, saying when you have 3 citations for sales to minors in the last 2 years, you're going to be objected to. Now, whether you'll be ultimately refused or whether you're going to be given okay, we're going to do a conditional licensing agreement, but if you mess up again, you're going to lose your license, is really going to be fact specific to each entity. But we can at least show you what the trigger is when we get back.
That's helpful. Yeah. So, you know, to know that if there's a conditional licensing agreement in place, there is the possibility that one oopsie and they're done. So this one, what is the best first point of contact for residents with problems with bars and restaurants? We talked about how there's a lot of different ones. Do we have a sense of what is best?
So the first thing we would tell you to do is contact your municipal police department or your local police department, because we want to assure there's no emergency issue going on there. You know, if it's something that is outside of their purview, they often will contact us, or if you're not getting relief from them because it seems like it's something within the liquor code. In that pamphlet, there is already the resources to contact your local LCE office. If you do via the website or the 800 number, it will be routed to the correct office. So if you live in Butler County, for instance, that's the Punxsutawney office, that's on the Pittsburgh office. If you live in Butler County and you get on that website, it will route the complaint to there. Be assured, every complaint we get, we do investigate that complaint. So.
And we do get a lot of complaints, but we do not do enforcement. So of course, when we receive them, we pass them on to the LCE, and like I said, we have a great working relationship.
As far as the best way to contact us, there's multiple ways, and they do that deliberately so that there are multiple ways for folks to get a hold of us and get a response from us. So either calling the office directly, the website, the 800 number, it all lands in the same place.
Don't be afraid to be redundant too. You call your local police department and also call LC. There's nothing wrong with that. If it's something that we can't cover, it should go. We will refer it back to the local police department.
Sounds good. When neighbors have complained about a particular bar, especially regarding noise and the behavior of patrons in the streets, what is the best way to address this? So we're looking for how to best address behavior that happens directly outside in the street.
So what I would say is, as far as if there's bad behavior in the streets, I'm going to go back to my last answer. Call while that's going on. Call your local police department while that's going on. And then, as Rebecca explained, if there's a causal connection between the bar and what's going on in the street, then we can come in and we can do a follow-up based off of that municipality's police report and try to draw that correlation. But if it's something that's going on, the biggest thing I would suggest is call in real time. Call while it's going on. Call your local police department. There's some disorderly conduct or whatever it is that's going on out in the street. LCE doesn't investigate disorderly conduct in the street. You know, there has to be a nexus to that licensed establishment. So you would want to contact your municipal police department in real time and give them that information. I know there's a lot of frustration sometimes where, well, they had a loud party at this particular establishment over the weekend. Well, if we can't verify that, you know, the party's obviously not still going on, so you want to make sure you make that notification.
Yes, I think that real-time documentation is very helpful, especially considering the good working relationship you have with the city of Pittsburgh Police Department. So I think that is really important. And also to remember that even when something may be related to a liquor establishment, it might not be a violation of liquor code, it might be a violation of another law, is useful too. Okay, if an underage patron is admitted to an establishment, a bar, with a false ID, is the bar responsible and is the bar cited?
They are, and I'll let, generally they are, when they do their due diligence.
Generally, they are. If they use, one of the things we're going to look into is, was that individual carded, and did they show an actual ID? There's a lot of good fake IDs out there. If it has the actual minor's photo on it, and it's his real information, the only information that's different is the date of birth. We will discuss that with our legal counsel and make a determination whether or not we're going to follow up and cite that establishment. If it is one or two individuals that are in there, they're probably going to get a warning. If it is 15, 20 individuals in there, they're probably going to be cited. And, with that, we're also looking at if the establishment has video surveillance in the establishment, we're going to look and see, are there doormen actually carding and comparing the ID that they're presented with the individual that's there, or are they just going through the motions and running it through the scanner?
And I know we're here to talk about licensees, but as you know, we're in the retail business as well. And we have almost 600 fine wine and goods spirit stores across the Commonwealth. And our threshold there is that to our employees, that the patron appears to be under 35. Now, big difference between 21 and 35. Card them. And you'd be surprised the hundreds of fake licenses that we have every year, because every time we ask them for their card, they drop it and run out the door.
And establishments generally they usually do their due diligence on this. We go in, we find places where, their security or the bouncer isn't doing their job, or there's a person within the establishment that sells to an underage buyer or something like that. Generally, they terminate that person. I mean, that's generally the recourse that individual faces. These establishments, far and wide, take this very serious because they know how serious of a violation that actually is.
Yeah, and I could tell when LCE started doing a lot of enforcement over the summer, because I would be at OTB or dive bar and I started getting carded. So it was working. Embarrassing for me. I'm getting gray, but it was working. Okay, what information documentation is public? For example, can we know what bars are under administrative review?
Once there's a formal objection to license, that is public.
And then you can go to our website and you can look up a licensee and it'll tell you the status, whether it's active or whether it is suspended, or whether it's not been renewed yet because we're going through the Nuisance Bars program.
Virtual hearing?
And yes, the other thing is, after COVID, we started having virtual hearings. And we're continuing with that process. And so you can go to our website, you can see when the hearing is scheduled, and you can just call in and listen. We plan to continue to make virtual hearings the rule, not the exception. But that allows for the community to listen in on what's going on to any particular application.
That's really good to know. And then with LCE, in terms of what's public versus not public, I would imagine there's a lot less that's public because of the way your processes work, but I'll let you.
So we have the two-prong approach. Criminal investigative reports are obviously not public. However, once we charge somebody criminally, those charges become public. And then the administrative reports would fall back to what the PLCD is discussing.
So for summary citations, disorderly conduct, public intoxication, etc., is there an investigation of where the individual might have been drinking?
Yes, absolutely. Normally those are born from being in that establishment or at that concert venue or whatever it is. So we absolutely do our due diligence to see that there's remaining alcohol.
Okay, so these three are related. So the first one relates to a question that you've already kind of answered, but I'll read it anyway. If an incident occurs outside of the licensed venue involving patrons, such as on the sidewalk or in an alleyway, is the venue at fault, and how is that determined? And then here, the citations have a real effect, and are bar owners responsible for what happens outside their establishments? And then what is the bar or restaurant owner responsibility for patron behavior outside of the establishment, especially with regard to disrespect of neighbors and
So, and we talked about this earlier, there has to be a causal connection between what's going on outside and what's going on inside. But the truth is, and I'll go back to earlier, the question was about urination. If somebody's outside urinating on a dumpster outside of a bar or a licensed establishment, the big problem is the person outside doing that by a dumpster. That's a violation of the law. And the police department should come in and be able to cite that person if they get there and they can prove the elements of that crime. So if it needs to go backwards, we need to go back towards the establishment. I'm sorry.
Correct.
More than urination, it's defecation also.
Right, it's massive problems. And I think it's probably the issue as it relates to liquor and licensed establishments is overserving. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but that's probably how we can tie it back to your role around enforcement of the liquor code. So then the next question is, what are the laws covering pop-up parties?
There is no pop-up party permit per se. There are different ways that you could end up with selling alcohol at a location that wasn't selling alcohol the day before.
Yes.
The easiest one for a retail licensee is their use of an off-premises catering permit, which they can use if someone contracts with them to have a particular event, an outdoor wedding or something like that. There are certain rules in regards to that, and the big one is all the servers are supposed to be ramp certified, and they're not supposed to be taking alcohol off the premise. So that's one way.
Responsible alcohol
Management
program. Yeah. The course
Training.
that you must complete. Yeah.
Most people are more familiar with tips training. Training, this is how you don't overserve. This is what you should do when someone presents you with a driver's license to make sure it's legitimate. So that's one way you could have a pop-up party. Another source of pop-up parties are called special occasion permits. And those are typically given or available to nonprofits who want to raise funds for themselves. So this is the theater. In theory, they could get a special occasion permit and have a street fair or something. So that would be another example. The third example is a lot of the manufacturing licenses now, the limited distilleries, limited wineries, they can use exposition permits. And technically, they're supposed to be used to give them the opportunity to tell the public about the quality and nature of their product, which is another way of saying sell it, right? So those are all different ways that those pop-up parties can show up. Act 81, which just passed, also has expanded the use of outdoor serving areas. So those can pop up quickly as well, because by statute, they get operating authority needed. And then we have to kind of catch up.
And it no longer has to be contiguous, right?
No longer, you can have a public road between the main establishment, and if there's an open field across the street, and they have proof to use it.
Up to 1,000.
Up to 1,000 feet. So there are various ways that can happen, and what's important is what you can and can't do there is going to depend on the permit, the underlying permit, in terms of what can be served, what hours, and what the additional rules are.
And at least for the special occasion permits and off-premise catering, there is a requirement to notify liquor control enforcement and or the local police within a certain time period.
I'm gonna make an assumption that that question was actually geared towards the South Side specifically. Because they were having problems with the word pop-up parties. What in essence it was just a bunch of people would show up at like a retail establishment and start drinking alcohol. Or they would show up out on the street by their car after the bars closed and drank alcohol. We looked into these when these occurred, and we would attempt to see if they were trying to sell the alcohol. Because if they were trying to sell the alcohol, then it would be a speakeasy, it would be an illegal sale of alcohol. That is not what they were doing. At least that's not what we could establish. They were literally bringing their alcohol to, there was a clothing store, or some sort of retail store. I know that it was occurring on the side of the street. Now you get into, like on the street one, for instance, now you get into like an open container situation with ordinances and things like that. That's something that the municipal police department would have to deal with. That's not under the purview of LCE at that point. If I'm correct, I think that's what the pop-up parties, what they were referring to. We did look into those when we would find them to see if we could try to purchase alcohol. If we could have purchased alcohol, we would have seized everything we could have right then and there. They weren't selling alcohol. They were just bringing their own alcohol and going into different locations and consuming alcohol. Like I said, the ones inside the retail establishment, I don't really know what the recourse would be there if they're not selling it. The ones on the street, that would fall back into a city ordinance issue where they have open containers and stuff out on the street.
One of those fun areas where it's hard to figure out which government agency is responsible for what. So we're back now to overserving. So I think a lot of the issues that we see with problem behaviors stem from people who are too intoxicated. And so the question is, how do you enforce around overserving?
So we conduct investigations for that. We've received complaints sometimes where we have undercovers inside a location. They will see a violation for that, and then we either bring whatever's appropriate, whether it's the violation or the warning. Most of those we get though, I would say we get them two. One is we get them from, I review every DUI arrest that the state police make within my district enforcement office, just like all of my counterparts do. So if we find that there are 15 DUIs, and since we're here for the south side, there was a DUI taken that was out all the way up by the airport. And when they arrested the person said they were drinking at a place in the south side of Pittsburgh. So we make it, are they serving people? Are they over-serving people? And the other way is we get complaints for serving physically intoxicated patrons. And we go in and we try to see if they're doing that. We try to establish the elements of that violation. So that's how we combat that. A lot of times, though, we can't just draw the nexus of public urination and over-service. We just don't, we can't automatically assume that nexus. We have to go do our due diligence to make that, to prove the elements of that so we can bring the violation.
That makes sense. And I think some of the giggling earlier around public urination and the thought that officers would rush to the scene in time to catch the person in the act, is part of the difficulty, but certainly officers could get to the scene, people could testify, and they could then breathalyze that person.
They wouldn't do that necessarily. They wouldn't need to, because they have the elements of that. If it's whatever the crime is, whether it's open lewdness or whatever it is they're doing, or disorderly conduct, whatever they would cite them with, they can cite them. Keeping in mind, in most cases, that's going to be a summary violation. For something like that. So it's kind of where it is, but it's not something that LCE, without that causal connection, that they have the purview of. It's not our call, our call is, that's what the municipal police department, whoever that was. If you know that's going on, I would implore you to go to your local police department and say, this is happening every Saturday night. So.
Yeah, they know. As a follow-up around overserving, the follow-up question is bottle service legal? And if yes, in that case, how would overserving be compulsory?
By bottle service, I'm not sure what they mean by
There
club, or were you going to buy a bar?
As in, a scantily clad young woman brings a bottle to your table and that you have purchased.
Well, they would have to be a licensed establishment for you to be able to purchase the bar.
Correct, but how is the entity supposed to enforce overserving if if they're dropping a bottle off and not monitoring.
If, obviously that's born from somebody in this room that has seen this, call us, make the complaint, and we'll go investigate to see if that's going on. That's what I can offer you. We'll go to see if they're letting that go on inside their staff.
Is that legal though, for them to do that?
You can serve a bottle, but that's not a defense to the charge of being overserved.
No, yes, no.
So if you give someone, $7.50 and they drink the whole thing, at some point, their licensee is gonna have an affirmative duty to take that away from them as they show more and more signs of visible intoxication.
But we have to prove the elements of that, and that's what I'm saying. Please report that. We'll try to get in and go look to see if we can observe that violation. If it's a licensed establishment, if it's an unlicensed establishment, they're not allowed to sell any alcohol. Call us for that too, and we'll approach that situation.
That is helpful. So we talked about ramp briefly earlier, but this is a broader context. Do you still do the ramp program, and could bartenders be held more liable than just the business itself? As an alcoholic who quit about 6 years ago, I've been served too much too many times in the past. Could this be better handled if because the bartender who overserves will just go overserve at a different bar, and alcoholic will just go to the next place? Can we hold bartenders more responsible by enforcing a ramp card to be allowed to serve drinks and revoke when needed?
Yeah, so our grant program, our responsible alcohol management program, there's a few different elements for a licensee to get the certification. One, most times it's a voluntary certification, but there's two elements that and then we also have conditional licensing agreements where in every single one the board requires ramp certification. So you have the owner manager training that the owner is trained and told, you're responsible for your employees and their actions. So if you have bartenders, hostess that are over-serving, serving the minors, you as the licensee, the owner and or the manager are responsible for that. I don't want to speak to criminal, that's out of my wheelhouse, any kind of criminal violations, but they can obviously be cited, citations, a violation for that. There's also server seller training that is required in both elements, owner manager training and server seller. Those separate components, there is a timeline where those server sellers and owner managers are required to get, it's not voluntary, they are required to get that training. So if they fail to do that, that's also something that liquor control enforcement can issue a violation, and or if it's in an agreement with the board, we can object to their license in the future.
This question, who enforces collecting the county liquor tax, and does the LCB collect taxes from bar owners?
You don't, if by collect, you mean someone's submitting taxes to us? No.
The only place we would collect is at our retail store. And the state takes it every morning, so.
And that's reflected in the price.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. If it's 6%, I guess in Allegheny County, 4%, and it's 8%. And of course, the Johnstown plus tax is 24%. And we only collect that, obviously, in our stores where we sell.
Is BYOB the same as a club charging a cover and then giving away free alcohol?
Yes, that goes back to the bottle club. The parameters of enforcing that, like I said, go back to the police department that covers that area. If you have that specific issue, contact us and we will meet with your chief of your police department or whoever the head is, if it's a smaller police department, and we'll provide them the information they need. But at the end of the day, the responsibility is on them to make that enforcement.
Who has ultimate jurisdiction on issuing a liquor license? The common pleas court or the LCB?
After we make a decision, and it is appealable to the Court of Common Pleas, of that county. And then after that, it's appealable to Commonwealth or Superior? Commonwealth. Commonwealth, and ultimately it could go to the Supreme Court.
The last court that has de novo review is the common pleas court. So again, they can look at the same facts we did and reach a different conclusion.
So the court then is who ultimately has the jurisdiction there.
If they appeal,
If they appeal.
the licensee appeals are decision.
And do licensees typically appeal?
We take their license away.
Yeah.
That's
So-
almost automatic.
Yeah.
Okay, that is what I figured. So, in practice, then yes, it is the court who has the final call.
And if I could add, in cases where someone's buying a license to transfer, if we have had incidents where, a neighbor, a protestant or petitioner had filed, the board may have approved that license, and we've had the petitioner file the appeal. So ultimately, the court will make that decision.
So then at the end of the day, it probably is a good thing for people to ask judicial candidates about this, or and their current judges. Okay, so this is a broad question. I think we've touched on some of it already, but we can talk more. How can the community be in control of the number of bars in our neighborhood? We've talked a little bit about the bill that I have around local control for saturation. That would be something that if my bill was passed and then passed the Senate and then signed by the governor, City of Pittsburgh City Council would have the ability to define saturation and what it would mean for a community to be saturated. That is not going to happen anytime soon, but that would be one way for the local community to have some of that. I think maybe we can touch on 611 actions one more time, and if there's anything else you all can think of.
Sorry, go back and touch on one.
The 611 action.
No, don't know that we can really add anything.
It's something we could eventually get to and consider. But like I said, we don't start at the 611 action. We work towards the 611 action. And we have to have the support, and we have the elements to be able to take that in front of a judge and have to uphold that.
Right. But the community can also file a 611 if they would like, correct?
Correct.
Yes, so that is one of the tools that the community has. Now, you do want to make sure you have all of your ducks in evidence and all of the things in a row, which is typically why the DA and LCE are the ones handling it. But it is a tool in the community or in the municipality's toolbox as well. Could the time of closing of bars be moved to midnight? I think this is supposed to be by administrative action.
We can do it as part of the conditional licensing agreement.
We could do it as part of a CLA, but again, that's an individual basis. Otherwise, the closing time is set by statute.
Okay, so that is something that is established in law.
Yes.
But for problem bars,
Right.
you all would be able to make that.
Because CLAs were allowed to impose additional conditions if the licensee is agreeable, and they become binding both on the location and the licensee.
Is there any transparency to residents to see the status or any actions taken on nuisance bar complaints? So I think you touched on status, but we can overview that one more time. And then I think in terms of actions taken, is there a database of those?
Well, LCE contacts all the complainants and lets them know what happens with their complaint. So I can tell you that from our end of it, like, we report back to the complainant and let them know, what the outcome was of the investigation, or the outcome of our investigation of their complaint.
And all of our actions are public record. So we're now streaming our public meetings, but also our minutes are on our website. So you can tell what actions are taken against what, for or against any licensee. But if we had an active nuisance bar investigation through LCE, that wouldn't be made public. It's an active investigation. So you're not going to be able to research it and find that.
That makes sense.
And if we're in our renewal process, and just still gathering that information, saying public at that point.
That makes sense. So there's a fair amount of privileged information that you all are dealing with at any given time, but any final action that's taken is public record.
That's correct, correct.
That's helpful. So this one I'm going to assume is privileged information by virtue of still being under investigation. But someone asked, what was the result of the meeting with Walker's pub owners 24 hours after the recent stabbing? What changes are the owners making?
We can't comment on things like that.
I figured, but I wanted to be the voice as it were. So yes, I would hope that changes are happening, but I understand that you all cannot tell us. So this one is for both agencies. Do you think the system is working in regards to East Carson? And if not, what policies would you like to see lawmakers change? So I don't think the system is working. I've already proposed my changes. I would love to hear what you all think.
Well, we're obviously we work closely with the leader on every year with the staff, and some things that we'd like to have better control over, and something that we'd like to be able to do. And I don't know if you want to elaborate.
The one thing we've asked, and Representative DeSenator noticed, is the changing the standard of review in common pleas, so there has to be some deference to our decision making. Hey, we're clearly wrong, or there are no facts to support it, or we made an error of law. That was the standard when I first started working for the Liquor Board. It got changed by a Supreme Court decision several years in, and we've just never been able to get the law changed back. But that would make the nuisance bar process much shorter, and it would allow the agency that sees these over and over again to try to set standards.
Unfortunately, we asked our friends in the legislature to play more defense than offense on our behalf, and they do a great job at that. So thanks.
I appreciate that. I wish we could do more offense and less defense at times, but happy to do what we can in the role that we are given. And certainly when it comes to the decisions of the court and the impact on the legislature, we're always willing to work with you on that.
From the enforcement side, we work within the confines of the rules that are dictated by the legislature or by the board. So all I can speak to is we are still in the South Side, just as we're in a lot of places, but we're still in the South Side. We're still meeting with stakeholders. We're still being as proactive as possible. But we're just not going to be successful all the time. So what I can ask is just the continued cooperation from the city of Pittsburgh and the state police and everybody else, that we can try to come to a successful resolution of some of the things that are going on down here. So, like I said, we don't get to have an opinion necessarily officially about what should or shouldn't occur.
That is helpful. We've been talking quite a lot, I think, about working together. So the last question here, and I guess I'll put out a call if anybody else has any remaining questions. Feel free. We will get you a note card. This question, I think, goes to the motivation of businesses. And so the question is there a sense as to whether or not these licensees understand the impact their patrons are having on the community, or are they more, willing participants in allowing?
I think if we're speaking especially about the South Side, I think in reading between the lines, right, there's a high concentration of liquor license in the South Side. We would all agree with that, right? The vast amount of them just want to operate their business. Like that is the absolute truth. That's been my experience. I'm sure you, Rebecca, would concur with that. We've been in these meetings with stakeholders and with the businesses, and when we go meet with them, even the ones that might have an issue, when we go meet with them, most of those folks still come into some sort of compliance and assist us. And like I said right at the beginning, the one location that there was a shooting outside of, when we go and we discuss it with them before anything, before any of this jumps off, they agreed, yes, we need to stop having these problems. So they even helped us by eliminating a certain concert they were having on a certain night. So yeah, it's been my my experience that they absolutely want it to be safe. They just want to run their business. And they don't want backlash from the community, things like that. And if you would go to some of these meetings, I think we went through with the city of Pittsburgh had one with their nighttime events coordinator, that's Allison Hardman. That was this meeting. I think there was probably 150 people there, and the whole crux of that meeting was we just want to run our business, and they're trying to figure out how to do that in a safe manner. And they don't want the issues and the headaches also. That's been my experience.
No, I think that's been my understanding as well. Conversations that I have had with business owners. Obviously, there are folks who want to make a quick buck at the expense of the community, but those are few and far between. Most of the businesses are, very interested in having this be a safe and productive place to do business. So this question goes back to ramp. Can you make ramp mandatory for bartenders' individual accountability so it can be revoked individually?
You mean, could you like uncertify them?
Well, I understand it's voluntary now, so can it be made mandatory?
We do
A server seller, there is a requirement 180 days after they are hired, they have to get server seller training. So that piece of the component is required. An owner manager, we did just have our regulations approved where a first time owner or manager, they're required to do classroom training, like a first time classroom training, and thereafter they can do it online. But that's a requirement also that they have to do it within 180 days.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 6 months for server seller, 180 for owner manager.
Okay, so they are required, and so then I guess the question is, if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, can that be revoked? That's it.
I think typically the focus is on citations. You put the license at risk, rather than talking about the individuals. There is no real mechanism to bring some kind of case against an individual for their behavior. It's not, you can't cite them. Now, I think what happens to, like, someone serves a minor, oftentimes they lose their jobs. So that is the penalty that they suffer. But I've never heard of a decertification of someone's training.
Okay, so in other words, it's more effective to put the license in jeopardy than it is to go after someone when the owner can just hire a new person.
Yeah, there is a mechanism for the it's like going after the license. There really isn't one for the latter.
This one, we mentioned earlier the amusement permit, and this person wants a little bit more explanation about what that is and what it allows the business to do.
The amusement permit is necessary if you're going to have people dancing at your premises, and by dancing I mean patrons dancing, not necessarily entertainers, although that as well. If you're going to have bands, if you're going to have music, if you want to have entertainment, for lack of a better term, you need to get an amusement permit. At one time, there were restrictions as to who could get it based on your sales of food. That was statutory. That changed many, many years ago. Now you can just, as long as you pay the fee, you can get an amusement permit. And again, the bright line we always say, if you think your patrons are going to dance, get up and dance, you need that amusement permit, be it a jukebox or anything like that. If you have problems with noise, if you have problems with bands, you can put that license at risk, but it is those types of issues. Like if you're serving someone who's visibly intoxicated, your amusement permit isn't affected by that, even though they might be there because of a band. You might lose your liquor license, but.
Okay. No, I think that's helpful context for people who weren't familiar, especially since so many of the issues that we're seeing are in association with things like noise or people coming for a specific,
What's the fee for the music?
It's 1/5 of their license fee, so they can range from $60 to $120.
Good. All right, we have time for this, I think, one last question, and then we'll have to close.
Just like to make a comment as to city council's role.
Sure, but we're pretty close to time, so just briefly, out of respect for the city theater. This person, I don't live within 500 feet of a bar. My days of being inside a bar or club to see overserving, underage drinking, etc. are over. But I love my community and I want to help. What can I do to support you and my neighbors? So for me in particular, in my role in the legislature, it is helpful if folks are advocating around legislation that they would like to see passed. That's very helpful. But certainly also if you're hearing of things happening in the community, that is really useful as well. Just to pass along or to make sure that it is getting reported to the proper entities. That is particularly helpful. I don't know if you all have more to add on that front.
Oh, that's good for it. Yeah.
All right, Councilman, briefly.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, if I may, because it came up about the role the city council plays in some of these decision makings, and so I just wanted to be clear. There are two types of alcohol license transfers. There's inter-transfers and inter-transfers. Something coming into the city from Monroeville or from Van Avenue is going to come before city council. We're going to have a role in the decision of that license being able to locate in the city. And as the attorney spoke to, we can place conditional licensing agreements on the transfer of that license. The board has supported that. They transfer with the license, and we can put conditions on the license. The bill that state senator or state representative Bennett references is more about how they move freely within the city. We have no purview on a local level as to how they move freely. So we saw saturation happen in Oakland. We saw saturation then morph to the Strip District, and we saw saturation morph into the South Side. We saw it then morph over to Lawrenceville. And so, as much as city council and local authority government would like to have a say in the movement of licenses in the city, we do not. City council did pass ordinance back in 2007, which did do exactly that. And because it was related to zoning, it was actually considered to be in place as fact until the zoning decision could be made. It was ultimately not upheld by the courts. It was overturned. And so once again, alcohol licenses move freely throughout the city with no local oversight. What the representative is offering and what we need the help of our advocates to advocate for is to return some level of local control to the municipality to say, hey, maybe this is not the best idea. Perhaps we already are, and I'm not an advocacy for arguing against saturation. It's the operation of the license that becomes problematic. But where we need help on a local level is to be able to give some power back to the local municipality to say, hey, perhaps we shouldn't have bar stools that serve 4,000 people in one intersection on an historic Main Street at 16th.
I appreciate your support on that issue, Councilman. I think that it's really critical that we all work together on that point to make sure that we're getting what we need accomplished. I think it is incredibly important to have local control because, as I said earlier, what works in other parts of the state does not necessarily work here. So I'm proud to have been an advocate for that legislation since the spring. I appreciate you all coming out tonight. I want to shout out City Theater for letting us do this. You all are incredible. I'm excited to be back Thursday for the show. It's going to be great. If you haven't seen it, I hear wonderful things. Thank you all for coming out tonight, all of our elected officials who came out. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me or anybody else.